All right. So, I'll just I'll just talk about let's see. Mm, no, that's not it. That's not it. Here we go. Okay, you know how to get to the course. Okay, good. All right, I'll talk about we're undergoing some changes, but they're not major. So here's come on. I'll just point out some important facts. On this welcome page, I've added the tutoring schedule for Barry Pine. Actually, he's located at the Greenbrier campus. If you need another uh, version of the material from somebody else trying to explain it to you, all of my students that have used him have had good luck, and he does his tutorials virtually. So just check out the details there. Uh, I will note one thing he's added this semester is that he gets a lot of spam calls. So if you he won't answer the phone. So if you text him or email him, that's a better way to set up an appointment, I guess. And those are his days and times. And this is all free. The school provides it. All right. So when you go into the course, you can go to assignments, or you can just go into content. Let's make that bigger. Um, that's not for you. I don't know why that's still there. I'm trying to sort out a problem with my organic class and their homework, and we haven't managed it yet. Okay, here's where you can get everything that I hand out in class is duplicated in Brightspace. So if you miss something, um, you lose something, you've always got another option. So the syllabus is here, and let's just take a look at it. Contact information, your textbook. Do you have your textbook yet? It's actually access to the Cengage textbook is covered in your fees. Yeah, so you should be able to register for the homework just by using your New River email address when you go into the Cengage. Have you been into Cengage yet? Okay. Okay, they may remember you. It depends. Since you're coming in from, you probably came in from WVU before, didn't you? Okay, so you'll come in from us, and they'll probably make you re-register with our email. And when you do that, you only have to do it once, and then you'll have access to the homework assignments. And I'm going to let you guys. I've got a little blurb in here on. Let's see, where is it? Let's bring that down. Here we go. On AI. Right. You guys probably know AI better than I do. And that's good and bad. You're going to need to know how to navigate AI in your job market. Fortunately, my job market is on the downhill slope, so I don't have to pay much attention to using it. Although I've used AI to summarize my notes. That works pretty good. But the problem with AI is, well, I thought I had don't I have a description in here? Maybe it's on the other side. Yeah, here it is. Okay. I just don't want you to use AI as a crutch. Learn the material. AI can make you more productive. Um, if you depend on the AI to answer questions, you may get the right answer and you may not. Okay. That's the short version. Okay, so let's go back up to the schedule. This schedule is designed to keep us on track. It's for me as well as for you. So I've got our, like there's Tuesday, 26th, that's the first day, and we're gonna do these introductions and then cover chapter 10. And on the right-hand side, I've got a column with the 104 labs that run in parallel. All right, so we can, that's to help me not put too much on one day. Right, if we have a lab, I try not to do some other things. During a regular semester, we don't have labs on exam days, but that's unavoidable in the summer because we only get 10 weeks. So we will have exams and labs on the same days very often. So the labs are on Thursday. So what I've done is I've blued out the days that there's no lab activity. But hopefully that'll help you see what we're doing that day. And we'll talk more about labs on Thursday. Okay. So you'll see that the things that are due and the dates they're due, I've highlighted those in yellow. So homework for chapter 10 and 11 and exam 1 is due on June 4th. So that's a week from Thursday. Okay. All right. There's some other stuff in here. I tell my students to read the syllabus, but very few of them do. It's just, I guess it's human nature. There's a lot of information here, and if you ask a question that's covered in the syllabus, I generally don't berate you for it. Okay, so I Zoom, even if the class isn't identified as a modality of Zoom, I Zoom the class anyway, so I can record it. And I post the recordings in Brightspace. Actually, I upload them to my YouTube channel and then put the links in Brightspace. So if I go back, let's see, let's go back. If you miss a class, now if we don't have a lab that day, I do have the alternative for taking exams in Brightspace, right? But we use Respondus Monitor and Lockdown Browser as a proctor. So if for some reason you can't make it to class to take the exam, then you can do it in Brightspace. And if you get it done by midnight on the day it's due, then I count you as present. I was going to say something else too. Let's go down here to start here. That's where all your lessons are and other resources. So if we go down to today's module, which would be learning modules here, you might need to access some of the material. You'll need a PDF reader. Do you have Acrobat on your computer? There's a link here, free PDF readers. You go to that website and install that on your computer. For these free things like this, you want to watch out when you're installing it because they'll try to install other stuff along with it. Be sure to uncheck those things. Okay, so when we get into, let's see, learning modules, here we go. So here's where all the materials for each of the exams are located. So there's exam 1, chapter 10 and 11 here on the left. And I'm still using the old format. Brightspace is coming out with a new format, a new look, and I've tried it and I don't like it. So you may see it, other instructors might use that format, but I use the old format. It's easier. I don't know if it's easier for you, but it's easier for me to keep track of everything. So this exam 1 is going to be organized so such that you have a checklist right here. And that's to help you see, all right, what do I need to do for this before this exam? Right. So there I have uh, the different steps, just so that you don't miss anything. Extra credits. Let's see. The exams, typically I have bonus questions on the exams, right? You can try them or not try them. There's no penalty. And then extra credit exercises are in the form of crossword puzzles. So you see these two crossword puzzles, one for chapter 10 and one for chapter 11. And those are to help you get familiar with terminology. And they can also boost your grade. I take all the results from the crossword puzzles, average them together, and that makes one exam grade. So it's like a bonus exam grade. Okay, so let's see. Here's the material for chapter 10 in this module right here. We click on that and you find PowerPoint slide sets that I've handed out. There are copies of those in here. And they come in three flavors. One is actually the PowerPoint slides. And if you have Microsoft Office, then that's the place to go, because it'll have all the animations and extra stuff that shows up in PowerPoint slides. If you find yourself in a position where you don't have access to your Microsoft Office, but you do have your Adobe Reader, then you can go to PDF files. It's just that they don't have all the bells and whistles. And then if you don't have either, you can go to this one and it pulls up the PowerPoint slide set in HTML format. So it'll load up in your browser and you can scroll through them that way. So you got three different flavors there. Okay, let me go back. Let's see, where was I? Here, let's go back to this one. I didn't see any breadcrumbs up there, so I had to go it this way. All right, review documents that I've handed out. And I'll use the review documents on the days that we do reviews. And I'll pull representative questions from there and we'll just do those in class. That's the time when, if you work these review problems and you run into, hit a roadblock or brain freeze or whatever, bring those to class and we'll do those first before I start talking. Okay. Or if in the middle of a review session, if something pops into your head, just interrupt me, right? I want to get the things that are troubling you done, definitely. And I work through some problems that I've highlighted as filler. Let's see. Okay, so here's a link. This one right here links to the introduction and lecture. What we're doing today, that was done back in January. Right. So when I get this one processed and uploaded to my YouTube channel and put the link in, I'll move that one down to archives down here. So this has everything that we've ever done in the class, all those links. So you can go back, probably the further back you go, the worse it gets. Okay, and then let's see. Once we get through chapter 10 and 11, there's a homework link here. So you go in here, and this takes you straight. Once you've registered in Cengage and you're logged in for the first time to the homework application at Cengage, then you can go in here and click on this, and it'll take you straight to that exercise. Okay, just kind of short circuits the multi-steps that you'd have to do if you just went back to where you were. And here's the review, link to the review. Here's where you find the exams. Now we're in instructor mode now. It'll look a little bit different, probably not as cluttered. But if I tried to do this in student mode, it probably wouldn't come up because I'm not a student. Okay. let's see, useful information. What I've tried to do, I think I tried to do it in 101, was put in the very first question that you see in the exam, there's like a PDF file. Did I have it in there? Yeah, you click on that and it opens up in a separate tab. And that's useful information that you can access during the exam. But if that doesn't work, here's a separate document that you can uh, open up and make, probably have to print it before you get into the lockdown browser, because lockdown browser will keep you from doing anything else. I have set it up so that you can make screen prints. You can print your screen if you want, and access to a scientific calculator is also within lockdown browser.
Are the tests now, are they timed now, or do we still get to take?
Well, I have a timer on them just to let me know if I'm giving you enough time.
Okay.
Yeah. It's not going to cut you off, right? If you go past the timer says, I don't know what it does. Does it pop up with a message?
Yeah, sometimes like you have for an hour and 30 seconds.
Okay.
When it gets to like 30.
Okay. Don't worry about that, right? If it takes you more than the timer, then it's not going to shut down. If your power goes out or your internet goes out, then send me a text message or an email and I'll have to reset the exam. If I do that, then you probably lose all your answers, don't you? Has it ever happened to you?
No, it luckily hasn't.
Okay. Yeah, but other students that have done that, you lose your answers if I have to reset it.
Yeah. Stuff like last semester we had to have like a code for get into the test. It was like 667, something like that.
I didn't put one on these.
Okay.
Yeah. If it says that you need a passcode, I don't know what it is, so I'll have to go in and uncheck that option. Okay. Let's see. Oh, and here are your crossword puzzles, right? If you lose that copy or you start working on it and you find yourself erasing or scratching and you want a fresh copy, that's where you get it. And you can submit these online. If I go say this one right here, chapter 10, click on that one. Okay. And there's the copy. That will probably download it and to wherever your download site is. And then when you finish it, you go down. Oh, it's not going to do that because I'm not a student. Maybe I better be a student. And then it'll make me go all the way back. Come on. There it is. Okay, so if I do that and then go down here, there it is, upload. So that's where you would upload your, like if you do it by hand, which is probably the easiest way, and then take a picture of it, then you can upload almost any version. In fact, I've even found a way to take the Apple HEIC photos and convert them to something that I can access. But usually, if you have the option to convert it to a PDF, that's fine. Or you can submit a JPEG file or any one of the other standard formats, and I can usually convert that into a PDF and then grade it. And then if you submit it this way, then the graded copy, I'll upload it to this. So when you look at your grades, let's go back up here where it says grades. If you go to your grades and you go down and you find there's homework there, crosswords. Then if you it should have an indicator over here that you have a file associated with it. That's the graded file. If you, and you should register for your homework through the Brightspace link. And that allows the app in Cengage to connect with Brightspace and send the results of your homework over to the Brightspace gradebook. I double check them anyway. I go in and to Cengage and download the results and paste them into my spreadsheet. So I use a spreadsheet to generate course average. So the gradebook that's built into all of these learning management systems, they're garbage. So I don't use them. I mean, I'll list the scores, but the course average is going to be in the form of, oh, it's not going to do that here. Yeah, it is. Current grade. That's a manual input. Right. I use my spreadsheet, and then any modifications I need to make, it's more flexible. And then I update that one probably once a week, maybe more often since this is the summer. And that'll give you an idea of where you are. If your current grade doesn't change and you've submitted something and you think it should change, probably means I haven't graded it and put it in the average yet. Right. So it may take me a day or two. And then you can always text me if you're concerned. Okay, so my contact information is in the syllabus, and my cell phone's in there. Probably the best way to contact me is by texting. I don't get as many spam calls on my phone as I do on my landline at home. My landline at home, I won't answer it unless the ID is somebody I recognize. Sometimes I pick it up and set it up. They just get a room full of nothing. Okay, any questions? At least skim through the syllabus and see if there's anything that pops out that they have questions about, and I'll address those the next time we meet. Okay. Oh, what you may want, since we're on a short notice, let's see, you probably already have a lab coat, right? You got a lab coat? Okay, does it come down to your knees?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. I've got eye protection that I can give you, unless you already have something, that's fine. Good. Okay. And I've got disposable gloves. So that's probably all we'll need for safety equipment. All right. So that being the case, let me stop this share and open up the first PowerPoint slide set, and we'll go through chapter 10. Let's see, how much time do I have? 9:30, we're good to 11 Central.
Yeah.
So numbers.
I think it's 70.
80.
Oh, it's 84.
684.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I can't dawdle. That's a lot of slides to cover. Okay, let's see. There's chapter 10. No, it doesn't recognize that link. Okay, it must have come from some other place. So let's go in here and just go looking for it. The problem I have is with this solid state drive. My computer at home is Windows 10 and this computer is Windows 11. Windows 11 has a stricter security on their files, and it gives me problems sometimes. So that's why I have a backup drive in my office in case it messes this one up. Okay, PowerPoint's here. And this is in the background, so you guys are not seeing me do this. Here in chapter 10. There we go. Now let me share. Go over here. Share. And all right, let's do it the old-fashioned way. From beginning. There we go. Get that out of my way. And there. All right. So where did we leave off? 101.
I'm pretty sure it's in chapter 8 or chapter 9.
I think it was 9. And it was with chemical bonding. That's what it was. We left off. We did various theories for chemical bonding, and ended up with molecular orbitals. So you guys have covered molecular orbitals. Good, good. Okay. How about electronegativities? You got those? Okay, good. Because those are the electronegativities, especially, are going to be central to understanding the behavior of liquids and solids. All right, so I'm going to leave that door open. Get some circulation in here. When we consider how molecules behave, there are actually two types of bonding. One is bonding that's within the molecule that we've covered so far. All right, what holds the atoms together in a single unit. And that's what intramolecular bonding means. And when we identify a substance as a molecular substance, we're talking about a covalent bonding, sharing electrons. So these molecules behave as independent units, right? We'll talk about ionics in a little bit, but for now, these intramolecular bonds are within the molecule, and they allow the molecule to behave as a single unit. Okay. Those individual molecules can also interact with one another. We'll start off with pure substances first. All right, you can only have one type of molecule in the sample, like water, pure water, for instance. There are different types of bonds that can occur between molecules. The intermolecular forces would cause their interactions to change depending on how strong they are. And we classify these bonds based on their strength. If the molecule has a dipole, that is, if it has a slightly positive side and a slightly negative side, like water, right? Remember how we determine the polarity of a molecule? Got to have polar bonds first. Right? So our polar bonds would be, in this scenario, would be toward the oxygen. Right? And then geometry. The symmetry of the molecule is what determines the overall polarity of the molecule. So since these are not opposite and canceling each other out, but they're offset, then we get a vector summation that's in that direction. So what that gives us is a slightly negative side here and a slightly positive side there. Okay. So that allows the molecules, when they encounter one another in this pure substance, to align themselves. And in fact, this is overall for the molecule, but in fact, you have slight positive here and slight positive there, and a negative on that side. So what happens is they orient themselves so that the negatives and the positives interact, and you get an attraction. It's an electrostatic force. That's a dipole-dipole interaction, because this molecule has a dipole, that molecule has a dipole. So that's one level of force holding these molecules together. A subcategory of dipole-dipole is the hydrogen bond, which boosts the strength of the bond up quite a bit. And this is characteristic for, you have to have the hydrogen, but the hydrogen can be bound to either oxygen or it can be nitrogen or it can be fluorine. Molecules that have these parts to them exhibit hydrogen bonding. And there, I may steal my own thunder, but it seems like this would be a proper time to explain why. The reason these bonds are so strong is the concentration of electronegativities. If you have a hydrogen, what is that actually? It's a proton, right? It's very, very small and close to that oxygen. So we know that the closer two atoms are together, the stronger the bond is. And if there's a difference in electronegativity, there's the stronger polarity as you move this proton closer. Well, that also allows this negative to get closer into that positive side because it's so small. It concentrates that positive into a small volume, and that increases the strength. That's one aspect of the hydrogen bond. The other is the electronegativity of that atom. Oxygen, nitrogen, fluorine are all reasonably high electronegativities. So that those two in combination give you this strong force, the hydrogen bond. Now, if you don't have any polarity in your molecules, the simplest example is a diatomic element. Right? Our diatomics are hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, chlorine, bromine, iodine. All those at room temperature and atmospheric pressure are going to be diatomic. And that means they're going to be nonpolar, purely nonpolar. I like to use nitrogen. So that is nonpolar. Right? There's no way to get any polarity out of that thing. But what we observe is as you decrease the temperature, right? And temperature is a measure of average kinetic energy for the molecules. So as you decrease the temperature, you're slowing them down, right? And you're giving any possible intermolecular forces to take effect as you decrease their energies. Then if you have any weaker forces, then they can start to act. And that's what happens. As you decrease the temperature down to minus 195 C, changes to a liquid. When it changes to a liquid, that means that there are interactions, intermolecular forces that are strong enough to hold those molecules together. Now, what we have to do is try to explain why that is. It's not polar, so any type of attraction that we're going to identify has to be temporary, right? And as it turns out, there is the possibility for temporary redistribution of electron density in this molecule. So for an instant, like a picosecond, it may be slightly negative on that side and slightly positive on that side. Right? So if it encounters another nitrogen molecule, the effect that it's going to have on this molecule is this negative is going to push electrons here over to this side. And that makes this one slightly positive and that one negative. Well, negatives and positives attract one another. Right? So that's the force that we attribute to causing the gas to turn to a liquid. Now, these are, well, there were several scientists working on it, but we give these this credit to scientist by the name of London, and he calls it a London dispersion force. And I think dispersion is the key word here. Dispersion is temporary. So this only lasts for a split second, a microsecond, or maybe a millisecond if we're lucky. But it's long enough to allow those molecules to interact and liquefy. Now, this happens in other molecules too, right? We find that carbon dioxide, right, if we draw our Lewis dot structure, carbon dioxide is a linear molecule, right? Like this, like that. Now we have polarity this way and this way, but they cancel each other out, which makes that a nonpolar molecule. But on the individual bond level, we still have slight distribution of charge, right? So this one is nonpolar. It doesn't have a permanent dipole, but the distribution of electron density is more pronounced. Okay, so while this one liquefies at 195, this one actually turns to a solid at minus 78.5. Right, so that's how you get dry ice. So the dispersion forces and, well, okay, let me put it this way. We categorize things. In this case, we're categorizing bonding because it's easier to compartmentalize behaviors when we do that. But in nature, right, you've heard me say this before, nature just does what it does. And we're trying to explain it, right? These forces are on a continuum, right? From strong force to weak force, right? These London dispersion forces are down here and hydrogen bonds are up here. But it sort of grades from one to the other, and there are conditions that say, all right, this one can't go. Well, actually, London dispersion forces, every molecule has them. Right? It's just if there's hydrogen bonding involved, they're insignificant. But we start grading toward dipoles, and we see that here, as we're going from here to here, there's sort of it's not an abrupt divider. It's more of other molecules in between that demonstrate boiling points and freezing points that are in a continuum. I hope that made sense. Okay, so those are the major forces that we identify to explain the behavior of molecules. And we witness those in terms of boiling points and melting points and other behaviors that we're going to talk about. Well, there's the hydrogen bond for water. And you'll notice, you ever look at a snowflake up close, say with a magnifying glass, how many points does it have? It's a hexagon. It has 6 points, right? So it doesn't show you that when water goes from a gas to a liquid. When it goes from a liquid to a solid, the molecules orient themselves in this hexagonal shape. So we have oxygen there, there, and there. This is a hydrogen, hydrogen, hydrogen. So that means if we make this one a hydrogen bond, then we got another hydrogen up here. And then we make this one a hydrogen bond, we got another hydrogen here. Make this one a hydrogen bond, we got another hydrogen there. So that's the way they orient themselves in the solid. That makes the 6-pointed snowflake. Okay, and while I'm at it, notice here in this picture, that's a liquid, right? They're randomly oriented, and as they encounter one another, you see the hydrogen bonds form and then break, form and break, form and break, because there's enough energy in that liquid to overcome those forces. But when we cool it down below 0 Celsius, then there's not enough energy to break those bonds, and they form in a more or less stable crystalline format. Okay, notice there that there's distance, space among the molecules. Right. But when you form this hexagon, it's like you go and you add more space right in here that's permanent. So what happens when you add volume? That adds volume to the same mass. So if you go from a liquid, let's say 1 gram of water, and you go from a liquid to a solid, it's going to increase its volume. So what happens to the density? Density goes down, right? Right? You increase the volume, density goes down. That's why ice floats in liquid water, because its density decreases. And that's the molecular explanation for why ice floats. Okay, I digress. I probably got a slide on it in here somewhere, but we haven't got there yet. All right, just to check, which bonds are stronger, the intramolecular bonds or the intermolecular bonds? The ones that hold the molecule together. And it makes sense, right? If it were the other way around, if the intermolecular bonds were stronger than intra, you wouldn't have molecules. They just get ripped apart if they ever formed. Okay. So we've been talking about phase changes, gas, liquid, solid. And that's as far as we're going to go. We're not going to get into exotic phases like plasmas, right? You'll see that in the muffler shop, right? When they cut your old muffler off, they use a plasma cutter. Or if you get close enough to the sun, you'll get to see the plasma and feel it, right? Like 1.5 million degrees in the corona. Okay. The molecules stay intact because the intramolecular forces are stronger than the intermolecular forces. As the molecules remain as is, and we're assuming, of course, that we're not presenting them with an environment that causes a chemical reaction, right? Their identity remains constant. And for simplicity's sake, we'll talk about pure substances for now, or phase changes. We'll talk about mixtures in a little bit. What happens to their phase changes when we create mixtures. But for now, phase changes, molecules stay the same, and all we're doing is going from liquid to solid to gas or the other direction. And these are explained by two things. The forces that we can generate between the molecules, whether it's hydrogen bonds, simple dipole-dipole, or London dispersion forces, and then how much energy is put into the substance, right? If there's enough energy, and usually we mean temperature, but sometimes we can do it with light, like ultraviolet light. But for simplicity, we'll just say temperature for now. If we put energy into a substance, say a solid, and there's enough energy in there to cause those molecules to vibrate so fast that they break the bonds, then we're on our way to a liquid. And then if we keep adding more energy, then we can break those bonds completely and make a gas, right? One thing about gases is their interactions are fleeting at best. Those molecules, we usually treat them like billiard balls. They just fly around and bounce off each other. But the amount of energy to go from a solid to a liquid is minuscule compared to how much energy it takes to go from a liquid to a gas. All right. So this just puts in black and white what I just told you. Go from a solid to a liquid, you add energy. The motions of the molecules increase and they break those bonds. They loosen the bonds between the molecules to go from a solid to a liquid. Go from a liquid to a gas, you break those intermolecular forces altogether. You just completely sever the bonds. Oh yeah, okay, so here's the density of water. Notice that the solid is less dense than the liquid. That's not typical for most materials. Most materials, when you go from a solid to a liquid, the density decreases. And definitely when you go from a liquid to gas, the density goes way down. Water is unique. I may not say unique because I don't know if there are other examples. There probably are some other examples, but I can't think of them right now. Okay, so when we speak of when we say a bond has a dipole, there's a term that we borrowed from physics called the moment. The dipole moment in this case simply means a vectored force. Right? And a vector has two components, magnitude and direction. Right? It's like the difference between velocity and speed. Right? Have you had physics? No? Okay. The difference between velocity and speed is speed can be in any direction. Right? You're going down the road at 70 miles an hour and you go into a curve and you've got it on cruise control, it's going to stay 70 all the way around the curve. Velocity has direction. When you go down the road straight at 70, you have a velocity of 70 miles per hour. But when you go into a curve, your velocity is changing because your direction is changing. So with dipole moment, we're saying that the dipole is directed along the bond in that direction. And then if we combine them for the whole molecule, we get a composite dipole moment for the whole molecule. So you need this dipole moment for molecules to attract one another. And in general, and this is one of those rules of thumb, I've got so many rules of thumbs, I need 4 hands with thumbs on them. Only about 1%, the dipole is about 1% as strong as a covalent or an ionic bond. And the covalent bonds and ionic bonds can vary among each other too, but in general, it's only about 1% as strong, which is good news because we don't want to break those intramolecular bonds with external forces unless that's our intention. Right? You can get water so hot that it will break those bonds. But it takes a lot. Actually, it's more efficient to use electricity. Okay, we talked about hydrogen bonding before. We only observe hydrogen bonding, this increased strength of intermolecular forces for nitrogen, oxygen, and fluorine bound to a hydrogen. And this can occur as simple molecules, say ammonia. Right, got hydrogen in the back, and then we got a hydrogen up here, hydrogen here. It'll form that triangular base, and then we have a lone pair up there. Right, so we get this dipole moment that way, and this way. So overall, plus that lone pair makes it more negative on that side. That gives us an overall dipole for ammonia that way. And I forgot where I was going with this. All right. This isn't the first time, it won't be the last, right? She's seen it before. Mine just goes boop. Okay, let's go back to the slide and see if it'll pop into my head again. These, we see that the hydrogen bonding dipole interaction with nitrogen, oxygen, and fluorine predominantly for those two reasons. The electronegativity of nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine is significantly higher than it is for hydrogen. Plus, hydrogen is very small, so the molecules can get closer together. And we know from Coulomb's law that the closer you get charges, you increase the strength of the force, whether it's attraction or repulsion. All right, those are our London dispersion forces. All molecules have London dispersion forces, every one. And, oh, I know where I was going with this. This nitrogen, hydrogen, oxygen, hydrogen, fluorine, hydrogen. Best example, I think, is say, right, if I have this one, and that one, like that. Well, I'm using some notation that you're not familiar with, so let me put them all in. Like this. So this is ethanol, right? The drinking kind. And it has these this oxygen, hydrogen on one end. That is capable of hydrogen bonding with other ethanol molecules where we have like that. Right? So that's why ethanol has a boiling point of about 75 or 78 degrees, I think, something like that, Celsius. Whereas if it didn't have this hydrogen bonding, then it would be more likely to boil at a temperature close to ethane. Ethane would be like this. Ethane is nonpolar because the electronegativity between carbon and hydrogen is not large enough to create a polar bond. Okay, so you can see hydrogen bonding from only parts of a molecule, right? And if we make the molecule longer and longer and longer, I could go to butanol, which has 4 carbons, then we have more parts of the molecule that are nonpolar than polar. And this butanol has a lower boiling point. And pentanol, well, as you add more carbons, you continually lower the boiling point because this becomes less effective on the whole. And because the molecule is so large, the chances of encountering one of these with another one is less also. Okay, that has to do with the size of molecules. And London dispersion forces can be described in a similar fashion. Let me see if I have, do I have a, no, I don't. Okay, so if you look at hydrocarbons, which is they're organic molecules that have nothing but carbon and hydrogen in them. And if we have a homologous series, we call it, we have like methane, right? And then 2 carbons would be ethane. And then we have propane, right? Our grill gas. And then we have butane, which is, you'll find it in cigarette lighters. And then we have, let's see, oops, that's not right, 12. Then we have pentane, and then we can just keep going on up to, go up to octane. That's in your gas tank. Right? And then you keep going. And what we find is, as we increase the size of these molecules, the melting point increases. We can't explain it with dipole moments. We can only explain it with London dispersion forces because these are all nonpolar molecules. But as the molecule gets bigger, you have more space, like a short molecule versus a long molecule. You have more opportunity for dispersion of electrons as the size increases. So you're more likely to get this dispersion here than you are for the smaller molecule. And that would increase the melting point because you'd have a stronger intermolecular force among these molecules. So you get to the point where, I don't know, you get C12, 10 and 12, you get diesel fuel. It's kind of thick, soupy. And then you get the asphalt, like C20 and C24. Right, it's solid, unless you heat it up. So whenever they're laying asphalt on the road, you can see the steam rising from it. Right, it's hot. Has to be hot or they can't lay it. Okay. We also see this trend for individual atoms. Right? If we look at the noble gases, we go from helium to neon to argon to krypton to xenon, and then I'm going to leave radon off of there. And the melting points or boiling points, either one, boiling point and melting point, increase as you increase the size of the atom for the same reason. Larger structures allow more opportunity for uneven distribution of electrons. And we see that in their boiling point. I may have a slide on it here somewhere. It just occurred to me, so I'll put it up there. Okay, what we're trying to illustrate with this slide is trends. If we look at the hydrides of the various elements, and if we see at the top, you see water, and then the tie line to hydrogen sulfide, hydrogen selenide, and hydrogen telluride. Those are all hydrides of elements in the same group as water, right? The dihydrogens, like that, okay? So we would expect to see a trend, right? As we increase the size of the molecule, you should increase the boiling point, right? And that's what we see from hydrogen sulfide to the selenide to the telluride, increasing the boiling point. But if we go the other direction to water, we should expect water to go down that line generally toward about minus 80 degrees if it were part of that same trend. But we don't. Water jumps up to 100 degrees because of hydrogen bonding. We get the same situation for the halogens, right? Hydrogen fluoride has an unpredicted high boiling point. Ammonia has a higher boiling point than we would expect. Now, when we get down to the carbon group, right, it's perfectly in line with the rest of its neighbors, right? Carbon, silicon, germanium, tin. All those hydrides tend to fall in the same line because we don't get hydrogen bonding with carbon and hydrogen. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work. The electronegativity of carbon is not high enough. Okay. So which molecules forms the stronger intermolecular forces? Water. H2O is water. Dihydrogen oxide. Years ago, there was actually, it was in the form of a document circulating that talked about the toxicity of dihydrogen oxide. And if you don't know what that means, then you might fall for it. Right? Sure, dihydrogen oxide can be toxic if you drink enough of it in a short period of time, right? Or you take it into your lungs, you can drown. But water is generally non-toxic. Okay, so you're right. That has the stronger forces because of hydrogen bonding. The dinitrogen molecule only has access to London dispersion forces, which are extremely weak. Okay. What we're trying to illustrate with this slide is that you can have this molecular formula, but the structure can be different. Right, we can see ethanol on one side, and this is the linear format in organic chemistry we use. Right, those hydrogens belong to that carbon, and these belong to that carbon. And then if we write it this way, right, we put the oxygen in the middle. Right, that changes everything. We have hydrogen bonding available here, but not here. This is dimethyl ether, and it is very volatile. It boils at a very low temperature. Right? If you open a can, actually, in the laboratory, we're more likely to use diethyl ether, but the same concept applies. Once you open that bottle, it's not long before you can smell it on the other side of the room. Whereas if you open a can of crystal clear, open a bottle of crystal clear, you won't smell it unless you put your nose right on it. That volatility is an expression of boiling point. Right? It's less volatile than this one because of that hydrogen bonding. And it's the same molecular formula. It's just the structure matters. Okay, which would behave more ideally at the same conditions of pressure and temperature? Remember what we talked about? What do we mean by ideal behavior? Well, when we were talking about gases, ideal behavior was the gases obey all the gas laws, right? They behave like billiard balls when they hit each other, right? There's no intermolecular interactions. And what we want to do, let's focus on that concept. When we're trying to define ideal behavior is which one is more likely to behave like a billiard ball when it encounters the other one. The less polar one, right? Yeah, so that's nitrogen. Dinitrogen would be more ideal at any pressure and temperature because I think it's like this. Carbon monoxide would be polar toward the oxygen. That would be less ideal because whenever one of these encounters another one of its neighbors, there's going to be a tendency to attract the other one. And that would modify its ideal behavior. Okay. All right. So what do we mean by liquid? Now we've talked about this a little bit in 101. Right. Liquids have they have no definite shape. They have a definite volume at any given temperature, but not a definite shape. So they have to have a container, but the container can be open. They have generally low compressibility. We can't say no compressibility because samples have been taken at 1-2 miles down in the ocean and found that the water there, if we account for changes in salinity, the water there is more dense than it is at the surface. So you put it under a lot of pressure, it will squeeze. But it generally has low compressibility. That's why we use liquids in hydraulic systems. Right? Farm equipment, you're trying to run the shovel or run the backhoe, and you pull the lever and the shovel comes up or it tilts. You're operating that with hydraulic systems. And we use hydraulic systems because they can be you can transfer the force through sufficiently strong lines to the piston, and you get such low compressibility in liquids that it transfers the force without being squeezed too much. In fact, the SR-71, you've heard of that one, the Blackbird airplane that would fly faster than Mach 3. Its systems had to be, the hydraulic systems had to be under very, very high pressure, extremely high pressure. So the mechanics were always cautioned, you watch where you're going and watch for leaks. Because if this system's under pressure and it leaks, that hydraulic fluid coming out of that leak will cut you in half. Okay, so they're not rigid, of course, right? They don't have definite shape. They have generally high density compared to gases, and their densities are similar to the solids that are of the same material. The densities do slightly increase for most solids as you go from a solid to a liquid. The densities are going to be a little bit less for liquids, but much, much higher than gases. They exhibit this other tendency called surface tension. Surface tension is a word that describes the resistance of the liquid to an increase in surface area. So when you blow bubbles, what shape do they take? They're spheres, right? Yeah. Sphere is the minimum surface area for a three-dimensional object. The perfect sphere has minimum surface area for, and that is due to the surface tension. They don't like to be misshapen. And it's, I think we're going to have some slides here in a few minutes to explain why the surface tension is. The larger the intermolecular forces, the higher the surface tension. Okay, so water should have a very high surface tension. And my first degree, my bachelor's degree is in biology. So my invertebrate zoology, that is spineless creatures, my invertebrate zoology professor had some property east of Atlanta. So he took us out there on a field trip and showed us various things, insects and other spineless creatures. And one of them was called a water skimmer. You ever seen a water skimmer or a video of one? They sit on top of the water and they spread their legs out way far apart so that they don't concentrate their force, the body mass, their forces in one spot. And they're taking advantage of that surface tension. And you see their feet create a depression in the water. And they get those legs moving and they can scoot across the surface, especially if the water is calm. Right? If it's turbulent, then they have trouble. But they're taking advantage of surface tension, and water has very high surface tension. Another thing that we can that we witness with some liquids is capillary action. We try to explain capillary action as a tension between cohesive forces and adhesive forces. So we need to define what those terms are. Cohesive forces are those forces, the intermolecular forces that tend to hold the molecules together. Adhesive forces are the forces that the substance will experience in contact with the container. So say if we have a glass tube and we put water in it, right? The water will do what? What shape is the meniscus for water in glass tubes? Right, concave. It's like this. Okay. what that tells us is that if this is glass and this is water, that tells us there's an interaction between the glass and the water molecules. And it's significantly stronger than the intermolecular forces, right? So what they tend to do is, as you get closer and closer to the water and you get fewer and fewer molecules surrounding those water molecules that are next to the glass, they tend to overpower the intermolecular forces. And they cause the water to rise up on the glass. And in the middle, of course, you've got all that mass of water pulling down on it, and it tends to sag in the middle because you don't have the forces here helping it pull up the glass walls. So there we have adhesive forces exceed cohesive forces in strength. So as the tubes get thinner, this mass right here is distributed over a cylinder that has a smaller diameter, right? So the smaller diameter means that that same mass will have a larger height, right? Right. The volume is going to be the same. So if we start here with our water, then we're going to draw it up here, right? That's capillary action. As the tube size gets smaller, the water moves further up the tube. Now it's the same mass as it was here and here, but the cylinder is narrower, right? And right, the volume of a cylinder we know is height times area. So if we decrease the area, then the height has to get bigger to contain the same volume. That's what I'm saying. Now, what about, have you ever seen a mercury barometer? Some chemistry labs, physics labs have them hanging on the wall. They're more decoration now than anything, because we have devices like on my phone. I've got a barometer, but a mercury barometer has a pool of mercury and then a tube in the middle. Right? And it's closed at the top. So this is a vacuum. And air pressure pushing down on this transmits its force here and causes the mercury to rise. And it rises to a certain level. If we're at sea level under 1 atmosphere, then this distance here will be 760 millimeters. Right? But what you'll notice is at the top here, it has a convex meniscus. So that convex meniscus tells us that the adhesive forces are greater than the cohesive, the cohesive forces are greater than the adhesive forces for a glass tube. Hydrogen is not interacting with the glass. And that's good for a mercury barometer, because you don't want the measurement of air pressure to be influenced by any interaction between the mercury and the glass. Right? And that's a good choice. We choose mercury for 2 reasons. One, it's very dense, right? If we used water, remember, how long would that tube have to be at 1 atmosphere if we did use water in our barometer? 33 feet. It would have to be a long glass tube. So the density of mercury being 13.5 times that of water means that we can shorten the tube. And that was probably why Torricelli decided to use mercury instead of water. Here we go. So cohesive forces dominate if you see a convex meniscus. Whereas adhesive forces, adhesive forces dominate if you have a concave meniscus. Okay, so another physical property of liquids that is traceable, attributed to intermolecular forces, is viscosity. So what do we mean by viscosity? Viscosity is a measurement of resistance to flow. Very viscous liquids flow like molasses in winter, or like Heinz ketchup from a bottle. Right? I don't think they show that commercial anymore, do they? Right. They take a bottle, take the cap off, and they go like this. And the commercial doesn't last very long, so you start to see something drip toward the end of the commercial. High viscosity means low flow rate. And the higher viscosity is due to higher intermolecular forces. Now, there are a whole host of different ways that industry uses to measure viscosity. One of the ways is simply to just have a standard size hole, and how long does it take to drip? Or you have a container of the liquid, and you drop a penetrator and see how deep it goes from a known height. And the deeper it goes, the less viscous. Or you can use the squeegee test, right? You take this metal plate that's calibrated along the edge, and then you put a certain amount of your liquid, and then you take a squeegee and you go, shh, and it goes down and then it runs out, right? So the less viscous will go farther. And those are like, you would see them in, usually in food testing labs at a processing plant, and they're testing the quality of their product. Okay, when we talk about solids, we're talking about materials that have a definite shape and a definite volume. And we can subdivide those solids into two types. The amorphous solids, remember what A means before a word? In the Greek, A means not. So amorphous means no form. It's formless in terms of its structure. It has no definite structure. And we see that a good example is glass. Glass is an amorphous solid. There's disorder in the structure. We can't see repeating units in it. Whereas crystalline solids have order. They have repeating units that we call unit cells. And if we can find out what that unit cell is, we can construct the whole solid simply by multiplying those unit cells. Okay. It's a three-dimensional repeating unit. There's another way to describe crystalline solids. It's called the closest packing structure. And we're going to look at both possibilities, and they're like first cousins, right? They're two different ways of describing the same phenomenon. All right. So the unit cell first, there are a large number of possible unit cells for any solid, if it's a crystalline solid. But we're going to keep it simple, right? This is not a physical chemistry class. So these are three of the major unit cells that you'll find in solids, and we're usually talking about metals. They're the easiest to describe. The simple cubic cell simply has this cubic structure, like that, and there's an atom at every corner. Okay? Now, if we drew it large enough, then they would touch each other on the sides. That's what that bottom one, that space filling model at the bottom, shows that they're touching. They touch along the edges of the cube. Now, how many are we talking about here? Well, 2, 4, 6, 8. There are 8 atoms in this cell, but there's only part of the atom that's assigned to that cell, because there might be another cell over here and over here and over here, right? There may be 8 more cells around them, right? So we have to spread them out. So we can only have 1/8 of an atom here, 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 here. So how many does that assign? How many atoms do we assign to that one cube? Well, 8 times 1/8 is 1, right? So this one only accounts for 1 atom, okay? Or 1 ball, whatever we're using to represent the unit cell. The next one is the body-centered cube. We simply take the simple cubic and put one in the middle, right? There's a lot of space in the middle there. But when we squeeze that one in the middle, it tends to push these apart. So now they don't touch on the edges. But how many atoms do we have in this unit cell? Well, we've got 1 from the corners, and we've got 1 whole one that's assigned to that one cell. So we have 2 atoms in that cell. Okay? The other one, the last one we're going to consider, is the face-centered cubic. Let's see, here, here, here. So we still have the corners occupied. 2, 4, 6. Let's see, I'm missing one here. And then instead of having one in the center, we have them on the faces. So we have one on this face, that face, that face, this face, and that face. 1, 2, 3, 4. There should be 6. There should be 6 sides on a cube, right? So how many does that give us? Well, if it's on the face, it's only shared with the cube right next to it, right? So that's half. And if we have 6 times a half, that's 3, right? So 3 atoms from the face and 1 atom from the corners. So that means we have 4 atoms assigned to the face-centered cubic. And this would be abbreviated face-centered cubic. This would be body-centered cubic, and this would just be simple. Okay. Oh, I got a video coming up.
If you could travel within a crystalline solid, you would see the particles, atoms, ions, or molecules arranged in a regular array. Here, the spaces are greatly exaggerated, but in reality, the particles are packed close together. The unit cell of a crystal structure is the smallest portion that defines the structure. Stacking unit cells next to each other in all 3 directions gives the structure. Many elements and simple compounds have unit cells from the cubic crystal system. Let's examine the 3 types of cubic unit cells. All cubic unit cells have particles at the corners of a cube. The simple or primitive cubic unit cell has particles at the corners only. In reality, the particles lie as close to each other as possible. Note that the particles touch along the cube edges, but not along a diagonal in the face or along a diagonal through the body. By slicing away parts that belong to neighboring unit cells, we see that the actual unit cell consists of portions of the particles. When the cells pack next to each other in all 3 dimensions, we obtain the crystal. If we fade the others out, you can see the original group of 8 particles within the array and the unit cell within that group. We find the number of particles in one unit cell by combining all the particles' portions. In the simple cubic unit cell, 8 corners, each of which is 1/8 of a particle, combine to give 1 particle. A key feature of a crystal structure is its coordination number, the number of the nearest neighbors surrounding each particle. In a simple cubic array, any given particle has a neighboring particle above, below, to the right, to the left, in front, and in back of it for a total of 6 nearest neighbors. The body-centered cubic unit cell has a particle at each corner and one in the center, which is colored pink to make it easier to see. With full-size spheres, you can see that the particles don't touch along the edges of the cube, but each corner particle does touch the one in the center. The actual unit cell consists of portions of the corner particles and the whole one in the center. 8/8 give 1 particle, and the one in the center gives another for a total of 2 particles. In this tiny portion of a body-centered cubic array, you can see that any given particle has 4 nearest neighbors above and 4 below for a total of 8 nearest neighbors. The face-centered cubic unit cell has a particle at each corner and in each face, which are colored yellow here, but none in the center. The corner particles don't touch each other, but each corner does touch a particle in the face, and those in the faces touch each other as well. The actual unit cell consists of portions of particles at the corners and in the faces. 8/8 at the corners gives 1 particle, and half a particle in each of 6 faces gives 3 more, for a total of 4 particles. In this tiny portion of a face-centered cubic array, notice that a given particle has 4 nearest neighbors around it, 4 more above and 4 more below for a total of 12 nearest neighbors. Stacking spheres shows how the 3 cubic unit cells arise. Arrange a layer of spheres in horizontal and vertical rows. Note the large diamond-shaped space among the particles. Placing the next layer directly over the first gives a structure based on the simple cubic unit cell. Those larger spaces mean an inefficient use of space. In fact, only 52% of the available volume is actually occupied by spheres. Because of this inefficiency, the simple cubic unit cell is seen rarely in nature. A more efficient stacking occurs if we place the second layer over the spaces formed by the first layer, and the third layer over the spaces formed by the second. That simple change leads to 68% of the available volume occupied by the spheres and a structure based on the body-centered cubic unit cell. Many metals, including all the alkali metals, adopt this arrangement. For the most efficient stacking, shift every other row in the first layer so the large diamond-shaped spaces become smaller triangular spaces, and place the second layer over them. Then the third layer goes over the holes visible through the first and second layers. In this arrangement, called cubic closest packing, spheres occupy 74% of the volume. Note that it is based on the face-centered cubic unit cell. Many elements, covalent compounds, and, as you'll see in the next 2 examples, ionic compounds adopt cubic closest packing. Sodium chloride adopts the sodium chloride or rock salt structure, as do many other alkali, halides, alkaline earth oxides and sulfides, and other ionic compounds. Picture separate face-centered cubic arrays of chloride ions and sodium ions as they approach and interpenetrate each other. The smaller sodium ions fit in the holes between the larger chloride ions and the NaCl unit cell. Zinc sulfide adopts the zinc blend structure, as do the copper-1 halides and several other compounds. If face-centered cubic arrays of zinc ions and sulfide ions approach and interpenetrate slightly offset from each other, each ion becomes surrounded tetrahedrally by 4 of the other ions. Note the blinking zinc ion and the 4 sulfides. You can see the relative positions in this slightly expanded view of the zinc blend unit cell.
Okay. That was kind of a long video, but I thought it was a good explanation. And it sort of brought things together. When we go to the closest packing model, which is the next way of explaining how these solids, crystalline solids form, maybe it'll make more sense. Okay, but before we get there, how do we get information about these crystal structures? One way is to use X-rays. Right? If they're regularly arranged and we fire X-rays at them, the X-rays are going to be diffracted as they enter and leave the crystal. They'll be reflected off of the surfaces. So if we have a layer here and a layer here, and then the X-rays come in here, some of them are going to bounce off like this. Some of them are going to go down here and bounce off like that. And what we look for is interference. And we talked about interference, didn't we? Positive interference and negative interference. Okay. Yeah. So if these come off this X-ray and then to the detector, then if we get an increase in signal at the detector, that means these two or multiple waves are synchronized. In other words, they're positively, now they're, positive interference. Constructive interference, excuse me. They constructively interfere with one another. And if they do that, then we can use this Bragg equation to tell us what is the spacing between them. All right, so this Bragg equation is has various components. The angle here is, right, whenever you're doing an angle measurement with light, the angle is between the vertical and the light beam. Right? The normal to the surface is your 0 point, and then that's the angle. Okay, so that's theta. And then d is this distance between the two. Lambda is the wavelength of that X-ray. Okay, in the, well, it could be in any number of measurements. We'll talk about that in a minute. N is the order. When you refract light off of a substance, it will refract at this angle, and then we'll get another one at this angle, another one at this angle. The order, it's like you play a musical instrument. Anybody a wind instrument? No? Okay. You can I started off on the French horn. I didn't get very far. So I put it up and later went to saxophone. But I noticed one thing is when I was learning to play the French horn, I could hold the keys in exactly the same way and produce two different notes. Right? And the higher note, it would be the second order. The first order would be the bass note, and then the higher note would be the next order up. What you're doing is you're canceling out the in this multiplexed sound, you're canceling out the lower tone and letting the upper tone dominate. So that's what we're doing here. The order will change depending on the angle. So if we change the angle, we get a different order. Okay, so that's what the N is. If we, so what this tells us is the distance between the layers. It has to be a crystalline structure, and actually their theta is different than the one I thought. Okay, so the theta inside the material is what I'm thinking of here. And it's actually, okay, that theta is the same as this theta over here. Okay. 6 of 1, half a dozen. I used to use this method. It was an old piece of equipment for determining the structure of clay particles. My PhD was in soil science. So we would go through this laborious procedure of separating the particle sizes from soils and end up with a fraction of clay particles. And I would have this drop with suspended clay particles, and I would put a drop on a glass slide, and it would spread out. And as it dried, those clay particles would lay flat. Right? So I could fire X-rays at them and determine the distance between the layers. And we use that information to tell us what type of clay it is. So we'll have some problems that we can investigate this further in your review document using the Bragg equation. Now that's with 2 dimensions, right? I had no problem with 2-dimensional X-ray diffraction. When you get to 3 dimensions, now you're talking about some really involved, and it's an art. So when we fire X-rays at this crystalline solid, rather than just a trace, right, where we have angle, right, theta, we scan through angles, and this is the intensity of the return signal. We go along and go, and then go along, go along, so we get first, second, third order at these different angles. Rather than that, you get a pattern. And that pattern tells you something about the crystal structure of the solid. This is how they determined the structure of the DNA molecule as a double helix. That really took some work. First of all, DNA is an organic molecule, and how do you get it into a crystal structure? I mean, ionic crystals are easy, right? They just naturally go there. But when you're working with DNA, you got to get it into a regular crystalline solid in order to use the technique. And that was what, and I forget the lady's name. It was a woman working with Watson and Crick, who did all the legwork for this procedure, and they got the Nobel Prize. Of course, by the time they got the Nobel Prize, she had died of breast cancer. So I'm not saying that they cut her out altogether. Okay, so within crystalline solids, we can subdivide them again. Some of the crystalline solids that were in that last video were like sodium chloride. That would be an ionic solid. You got both cations and anions mixed in there together. Molecular solids would be like, I don't know, ice, right? Formed of molecules only. Or you can even go further and form covalently bonded parts to the molecule. My favorite is diamond. Diamond is a molecular solid that's formed covalent bonds between every carbon atom in the diamond. So theoretically, used to be, it was difficult to find a diamond in nature that didn't have flaws in it. But now you can make them in the lab and they're perfect, right? No flaws. In that case, you could go, if you were at the atomic level, you could go from one side of that diamond to the other and never find a break. They would all be covalent bonds from one side. So that means That diamond is a single molecule. Okay. And then there are atomic solids. And that's what we started off talking about these as atomic solids. Say these were sodium atoms or lithium atoms or, I don't know, gold atoms. Those atomic solids are composed only of atoms in the lattice structure. These are examples, right? There's your diamond, which is a covalent molecular solid. Then you have the ionic solid here, sodium chloride. Then you have the hydrogen bonding for molecular solids. Excuse me. Yep. Excuse me. This came out of the textbook, and I'm not sure what I'm trying to show here. The difference between, okay, you know, I'm not going to spend any time on this one. It's not that important. I mean, if we need to talk about it further, then we'll do it during the review. It's there trying to organize our thoughts in terms of atomic, molecular, and ionic solids. So it's like a composite of what we've shown so far. Okay. The reason I wanted to bypass that is I'm running out of time, and I want to get to the closest packing model. We've done the unit cell. And now we want to look at the closest packing model, how it works. And I think in the interest of time, well, these are some assumptions. We have to assume that all the atoms are uniform in size and they're solids like hard spheres, like billiard balls. And how do they pack? How can they pack together? And that's where this video comes in. You'll have to tune your ear to an Indian accent, okay? But it's worth going to the trouble.
The three-dimensional modes of packing can be easily understood by dividing the whole process into 3 steps. Close packing of spheres in one dimension. In one-dimension close packing, there is just one way of arranging the spheres. Here, the spheres are arranged in a row touching one another. As a result, each sphere is in contact with 2 neighboring spheres. Thus, in one-dimensional close packing, the coordination number is 2. Close packing of spheres in 2 dimension. Close packing structures in 2 dimension can be generated by stacking rows of one-dimensionally closed packed spheres, one above the other. This can be done in 2 ways: square close packing and hexagonal close packing. Square close packing. In this type of packing, the second row of spheres is placed in contact with first row in such a way that the spheres of the second row are placed exactly above the spheres of first row. In such an arrangement, the spheres are aligned horizontally and vertically such that each sphere is in contact with 4 other spheres. So, the coordination number is 4. If we call the first row as A-type row, the second row being exactly same as the first row, so it is also called as A-type. If we keep on placing such similar rows one above the other, then such an arrangement is known as AAA type of arrangement or square packing. Hexagonal close packing. In this type of packing of spheres, the second row of spheres is placed in a staggered manner such that the spheres fit in the depressions of the first row. If we call the first row as A type, then as the second row is different from the first row, it can be called as B type. Now, if we place a third row above the second row in the similar manner, we will observe that the third row spheres are aligned with those of first layer, and each sphere is in contact with 6 other spheres. So, the coordination number is 6. Similarly, on placing the fourth layer, we will observe that the fourth row of spheres are aligned with those of second layer. Hence, this type of arrangement is known as AB-AB type of arrangement or hexagonal close packing. If we compare square close packing with hexagonal close packing, we will observe that empty spaces are less in hexagonal close packing than compared to square close packing. Now, what are these empty spaces and what role do they play in packing efficiency? The empty spaces in between the spheres are known as voids. These voids are responsible for decrease in packing efficiency of the solid crystal. More the number of voids, less is the packing efficiency of the crystal. Now, you must be wondering what is meant by packing efficiency. We have discussed about this in later part of the section. Now let us study about close packing in 3 dimension. 3-dimensional close packing from 2-dimensional square close packed layers. This type of packing is obtained by placing 2-dimensional square closed packed layer above the first one, such that the spheres of the second layer are exactly above the spheres of the first layer. In this arrangement, the spheres of both the layers are perfectly aligned horizontally and vertically. On arranging layers one after the other in this pattern, we will observe that each sphere is in contact with 6 other spheres. 4 from the same layer, 1 from the layer above, and 1 from the layer below that sphere. So, the coordination number is 6. If we call the first layer as A type, and since all the layers are also of the same type, this kind of arrangement is known as AAA type of arrangement. On observing carefully, we will find that this arrangement has generated a simple cubic lattice and its unit cell is primitive cubic unit cell. Dimensional close packing from 2-dimensional hexagonal closed pack layers. The 3-dimensional hexagonal closed pack structure can be obtained by placing 2-dimensional hexagonal structures one layer above the other. Placing second layer over the first layer. Let us take a 2-dimensional hexagonal closed packed layer A. Notice this layer has triangular voids. Place a similar closed packed layer in such a way that the spheres of the second layer are placed in depressions of the first layer. As the spheres of the second layer are aligned differently as compared to the first layer, so let us call this layer as B type. On observing, we will notice that not all the triangular voids of the first layer are covered by the spheres of the second layer. This gives rise to a different arrangement and different voids. Voids. There are two types of voids: tetrahedron voids, denoted by T, octahedron voids, denoted by O. Let us study how these voids are formed. When we place a closed packed layer above the depressions of the first layer, we will notice that at some places the triangular voids of the first layer are being covered by the spheres of second layer. At such places, a type of void is formed. This type of void is known as tetrahedral void, T, since a tetrahedron is formed by joining the centers of the four surrounding spheres. While at other places, we will notice that the triangular voids of the first layer coincides with the triangular voids of the second layer, such that their triangular shapes do not overlap. At such places, another type of void is formed. This type of void is known as octahedral void, O, since an octahedron is formed by joining the centers of the six surrounding spheres. Now, in case we need to calculate the number of tetrahedral and octahedral voids in a crystal structure, then just knowing the number of spheres will serve the purpose. Suppose there are n spheres in the crystal structure, then the number of octahedral voids generated is equal to n. The number of tetrahedral voids generated is equal to 2n. Placing third layer over second layer. Now let us place third layer over second layer. Stacking of third layer over second layer can be done in two ways. First, by covering tetrahedral voids. Second, by covering octahedral voids. By covering tetrahedral voids. The tetrahedral voids of the second layer can be covered by placing the spheres of the third layer over them. On doing so, the spheres of the third layer will get exactly aligned with the spheres of the first layer. So, if we can call the first layer as A type and the second layer as B type, then the third layer will also be A type. As the pattern of spheres is repeated alternately in other layers, so this pattern is known as AB-AB pattern, and the structure formed is known as hexagonal close packed HCP structure. In this type of structure, each sphere is in contact with 12 other spheres, 6 from the same layer, 3 from the bottom layer, and 3 from the top layer. So the coordination number is 12. Covering octahedral voids. The octahedral voids of the second layer can be covered by placing the spheres of the third layer over them. On doing so, the spheres of the third layer are not aligned with the spheres of either first layer or second layer. So, if we call the first layer as A type and the second layer as B type, then this third layer will be C type. Now, if we place the fourth layer over the octahedral voids of the third layer, then the sphere gets aligned with the spheres of the first layer. Thus, this pattern is known as ABC, ABC type, and the structure formed is known as cubic close-packed CCP or face-centered cubic FCC structure. In this type of structure, each sphere is in contact with 12 other spheres, 6 from the same layer, 3 from the bottom layer, and 3 from the top layer. So, the coordination number is 12.
Okay. Long videos. So you saw that last one was the one that connected to our face-centered cubic. And the attempt was made to explain why it packed that way, using whether it packed over the tetrahedral or the octahedral voids. Okay, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these next slides because they sort of rehash the same thing we were just doing in that video. But the information here came out of your textbook, and it should coincide very well with what was determined in that video. Let's see. So if we were to look at the hexagonal closest packing and say what unit cell, well, there's the face-centered cubic. You know what? The cubic closest packing would give you a face-centered also. So it looks like the hexagonal and the cubic closest packing will give you the same unit cell. Yeah. That's what I get. And both of them have the same coordination number, so I guess that's not surprising that they would produce the same unit cell. But when we look at it from the closest packing model, we see that they arrive at that unit cell through different avenues. Okay, coordination number is a concept that's used in a number of places in chemistry. I first encountered it with, remember when we were doing in the first semester, when our lab had waters of hydration, right? We had, I think it was copper sulfate was 5 waters of hydration. Well, the coordination number for that molecule would be 5, because for each water molecule you had 5. For each copper sulfate, you had 5 water molecules. And the coordination number also exists not just in those solids where we heated them and drove off the water and determined the molar ratio, but when you add some ionic solids to water, their color changes because they coordinate with a certain number of water molecules, and that changes the way they absorb light. So that's where I first encountered coordination number. Okay, so we looked at this earlier, right? Face-centered cubic gives you 4 atoms in the cube. Body-centered gives you 2, and simple cubic gives you 1. We're going to use that information in a sample problem here in a minute. Let's see. Well, first, in order to work out the problems that are coming, we need to be able to say, all right, what is the volume? How do we determine the volume of any one of these cubic structures? Simple cubic is easy. The length on the edge is 2 times the radius of the atom, because you got 2 atoms touching each other, right? And from their centers to where they touch is half their diameter, or r. So the diameter of one of the atoms is the length of the edge of the cube. And if we want to know the volume of the cube, right, you just cube that value, 2r cubed. And that gives you the volume of the unit cell. Well, if we know the volume of the unit cell, and we also know how many atoms are in that unit cell, and we know what the atom is, like which one of those atoms it is, we can determine the density. We can calculate the density. Because if we know it's got one atom, right, we can use Avogadro's number and the molar mass to determine the mass that's represented by that one atom in that volume. So we can calculate the density. That's where we're headed. If we have a face-centered cube, then it's a little different because we have to use some geometry. And I've got some handouts, but I don't know that they're going to be that useful. If you want to see them, I got handouts and they're in Brightspace for determining how we calculate the edge on that cube. Because if you know the edge of the cube, you can calculate its volume. So if we know the radius of the atom in a face-centered cube, then the radius times the square root of 8 is the length on that edge. And then if we have a body-centered cube, then it's a little more complicated. But still, if you know the radius and you know it's a body-centered cube, then the radius of the atom times 4 divided by the square root of 3 gives you the length of that edge. And that information should be in useful information. The last pages of any review document has useful information. I've definitely got a periodic table and then useful. So let's see. Yeah, body-centered cubic edge 4r over square root of 3. Then we have the others. Well, simple cubic Z is 2r. The other one is square root of 8 times r. The face-centered cube. Okay, so if we were to take this example and say, calculate the density of silver, if we know that it's a face-centered cubic and the unit cell edge is 409 picometers, we didn't even have to calculate the edge because it's given to us. 409 picometers. What's a pico? If we're going to do density, it's got to be in what units? Right? If it's a solid, density is typically in grams per cubic centimeter. So this would have to be converted to centimeters, wouldn't it? Okay. A pico is 10 to the minus 12th. So that's 409 times 10 to the minus 12 meters. And then we can convert that to centimeters, right? That's in the numerator, denominator, centimeter. There are 100 centimeters in a meter. So that'll give us centimeters on an edge. And then we just cube it. Right? How do we find out how much mass is in a face-centered cubic? Face-centered cubic is how many atoms? 4. 4 atoms per cube, right? So if we start with 4 atoms per cube, and we want to find out how many moles that is, right? We just need Avogadro's number. I got a loose thread here. And that's 1 mole. So we divide that into atoms. Atoms cancel and leave us with moles. Then we can use molar mass for silver. Right? So what's silver molar mass? 107.87. 107.87 grams. So that will give us the mass of those 4 atoms in that space. Well, this would have to be cubed. Okay. And then we would divide this into that and get our density. Okay. Did I lose you? Are we good? I got it drawn out down here. Now the density for silver is 10.5 grams per cubic centimeter. And here's the calculation. This one I did cubic picometers first, and then I converted it to cubic centimeters. It works either way. And then once we have the volume, right, then we take the 4 atoms and find that it's, well, I didn't do that all the way. I just went ahead and divided it by the cubic centimeters. Calculated at 10.5 grams per cubic centimeter. So we get good agreement. We can experimentally determine density and calculated density. That's just one practical application of the information. Okay, now, how do these things bond together? Well, if we're talking about metals, right, that's one thing that we didn't cover last semester. We talked about ionic bonding, we talked about covalent bonding, and we eventually ended up with molecular orbital model. Well, that molecular orbital model can also be applied to metals. But first I want to look, historically speaking, the first attempt, or one of the early attempts, I should say, at explaining how metals bond is the electron C model. It's kind of like Kelvin's plum pudding model for the atom. You have all these positive nuclei, and they're in a sea of electrons. And those electrons just kind of float around free among all the nuclei in the metal. Well, at a conceptual level, we can sort of accept that, but it doesn't allow for determination, just as earlier models for covalent bonding of molecules, it doesn't allow for determining of energies of bond. So we go to the molecular orbital model. Remember, the molecular orbital model says that once you form the molecule, or you form the association, in this case, the metals, once you form that, put those groups of atoms together, those electrons don't belong to individual atoms anymore. Right? It's like chemical communism, right? The electrons belong to the collective. And we build a new structure of molecular orbitals with their energy levels. Right? And if you have a mole of a mole of atoms, those molecular orbitals are very, very close together. It takes very little energy to move from one level to the next. And that's important for understanding the physical properties of metals. Right? They're good conductors of electricity, they're good conductors of heat, they're malleable, they're ductile. So as we add more and more atoms, the energy levels get closer and closer together until we get virtually a continuum in the final metal. If you have a mole of atoms, it's essentially a continuum of energy levels. Well, we also look at it in terms of the highest filled molecular orbital has electrons in it, and then right above it is empty molecular orbitals. And the distance between those two is very, very short jump. So if you had just a little bit of energy, or you push electrons in one side, then they bump up against the ones that are already there. They bump up into the empty orbital, they move over to the next atom, and they just keep cascading down. So you get good electrical conductivity with just a slight push from one side. Now let's talk about alloys. There are 2 types of alloys. And here's where the concept of the void comes in. If you have combination of, say, let's keep it simple, 2 metals. Let's say copper and zinc atoms. Most of them are copper, but we want to add some zinc to it. How would they fit in there? The copper and the zinc atoms are, look how close they are to each other. They're about the same size. Right? So the only way we can get zinc into this mixture is the substitute zinc for some of those coppers. That creates a substitutional alloy. And this, by the way, would be, at the certain level, would be brass. Okay. On the other hand, if you have something like iron and carbon, carbon is a very, very small atom as compared to iron. So carbon fits into the voids of the iron crystal structure. This creates an interstitial. This is substitutional. And this is interstitial. Combination, and this is how you get steel. This goes into the voids for the carbon. And what it essentially does is it forms bonds with the iron, and it resists a slippage of the various crystal layers past one another. That's why steel is a lot harder than pure iron. Pure iron, you can scratch it with your fingernail. But steel, that would be a different story. Okay, well, there are pictures representing the substitutional versus the interstitial alloys. Now we have different allotropes of carbon. Remember an allotrope? It's the same element, just a different structure. So the diamond allotrope of carbon has covalent bonds in a tetrahedral lattice among all the carbon atoms in the diamond. Whereas with graphite, you have covalent bonds in a hexagonal pattern with neighboring carbons, but the layers of graphite are only weakly bound. Right? Since graphite would technically be a non-polar solid, those bonds are only London dispersion forces, very weak. So if you have graphite here and you push on it, you're going to slide. And that's why graphite is often used as a dry lubricant. We used to have cans of it with this long needle-like thing. And we take it and put it in the top end of our cable guides for motorcycles and just squirt it in there and it would trickle down. And it's good to have that dry lubricant because if you used oil, it would accumulate dust when we were off-road running through the dirt. You know? Now, when we look at the energy distribution of molecular orbitals, we find that the energy gap between the topmost filled molecular orbital and the lowermost empty molecular orbital for diamond is very, very large gap. So it takes a lot of energy to move electrons from one to the next. Whereas with metals, the gap is very small. Now that characteristic means that metals are very good conductors of electricity and heat, whereas diamond is not. It has a very low thermal conductivity. And your gemologist will use that to verify whether what he or she is looking at is a diamond or a fake. They put this device and just touch it on there, and it will measure the thermal conductivity in that material. And if it has a low enough, if it goes beyond a certain level, they know it's not diamond. So my wife had a friend who offered us what was thought to be a, let's see, what's that blue stone that you can get from East Africa? I can't remember. Tanzanite. Tanzanite. It's a pretty stone. but it's not diamond. So said, all you have to do is send us shipping. So we paid for the shipping. We got the stone and said, oh, that is beautiful. So we happened to be in the mall at Cage Jewelers. And we walked in there and says, look at this stone we just got. I said, isn't that a pretty tanzanite? And they said, are you sure? Looks like a diamond to me. So they pulled out their device and put it on there. Sure enough, it was a blue diamond. So we said, we're going to leave this with you. And can you have your gemologist certify it, right? Value it, because we're going to have to add it to our home insurance. So we told her friend about it, said, nah, keep it rich anyway. We eventually set it in, put it in a setting with a guard band around it. It looks pretty good. But it was a simple matter of checking the thermal conductivity as to see whether it was a tanzanite or a diamond. Turns out to be a blue diamond. And it was natural, right? It was before lab-grown diamonds were common. Right? Okay, so this is what it looks like for graphite, where we have our molecular orbitals, and we form. This is kind of a, remember our hybrid, when the last thing we discussed in chapter 9, I think it was the bonding structure of benzene, that ring. And you had to have these unused p orbitals that could overlap. All right, so we were sort of combining molecular orbital with valence bond theory. And it produces this like donut distribution of electrons above and below the molecule, and that strengthens those bonds. So the layers of graphite are very strongly bound, but between the layers are weak bonds. Let's see. I'm running out of time. Right, we just go till 11:30. Oh, 11:15, I'm out of time. Okay, if you have to go somewhere, fine, I'll just keep recording. Otherwise, if you can stick around, we'll finish the chapter. Now, if this were on a Thursday, I'd have to stop and we'd go in the lab. So ceramics, they're what I call operationally defined materials. We define ceramics by their behavior. They're non-metallic. They're very strong, right? They stand up to immense compression forces, but they're brittle. Right? And they have a very high resistance to heat, and they're refractory toward chemicals. Refractory means they're resistant to attack. So the space shuttle was covered by these ceramic bricks. They have very, very high resistance to heat, which is good. If they're going to be a heat shield, they need to resist the heat. But they're brittle. So if a piece of foam flies off of your big orange tank and strikes the front of your wing and knocks a piece off of it, then when you try to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, you burn up, which is what happened to the, it was Columbia, I think it was, burned up on re-entry. So they're very brittle. They're typically made from clays, that is silicate type compounds or luminosilicates. And they're hardened by firing. So the bricks that you put on the front of your house, right, those are ceramics. They've been fired in an oven, and it changes the structure, the crystal structure of the clay when you do that. Right? If you just air dry it, you get mud bricks and, you know, a nice strong monsoon rain, and they wash away. We can take, we're going to shift gears. Semiconductors are just that. They're not complete conductors like a copper wire or aluminum cable in the high power lines. They conduct electricity, but they don't conduct it as well as a conductor. And more importantly, they're controllable. We can control their ability to conduct electricity by what we call in electronics is a gate. All right. There are two types of semiconductors. One is the N type and one is the P type. And all you have to do to get the N type or the P type is to know what the base material is. And for most semiconductors in our economy, the base type is silicon, right? Pure silicon. You can make semiconductors out of other materials, but it's more expensive. Now, there are certain engineering properties of other materials that warrant the extra expense, but for common electronic, silicon is fine. Okay, so how do you get an N type? An N type means you have excess of at least one electron in the structure. So when you substitute another atom for a silicon, right, this substitutional alloy, when you substitute another atom for silicon, it needs to have more electrons in it than silicon does. So what that means from the periodic table is they have to come from the right-hand side of silicon. So you could substitute phosphorus or arsenic or nitrogen, and they would have one more valence electron. The P type is you substitute something that's deficient in electrons, like to the left of silicon, boron, aluminum, gallium, indium. If you substitute those, then you're introducing a deficiency in electrons. So that's the difference between N type and P type. What do you substitute into your silicon matrix? And this has to be pure silicon. I mean, no flaws whatsoever. So they grow them in these huge crystals, and they pull them out of the growing chamber, and they're about that big around, and they're about 8 feet long. Then they slice them, right, into thin layers so that they can start building their circuitry on them. Okay, so with an N type, we have this extra electron, and it can move from the filled to the empty into the conduction band, we call it. So if you allow a charge to a voltage to push from one side, then those electrons will move in that semiconductor. Whereas if you do that with a positive side, then you move the holes. The holes move down from the conduction band into the. Now, the holes actually don't move. Okay, it's just a conceptual way of looking at them. The electrons still move, but when an electron moves from, say you have a hole here, an electron there, when it moves over here, it leaves a hole behind. So it looks like the hole moved from left to right when the electron moved from right to left. Okay, that's the reality. Okay, so these are various examples. We call it doping. We dope the silicon crystal with a certain number of arsenic atoms in this case to give us the N type, or boron atoms to give us the P type. And when you put the N type and P type together in certain combinations, you get the various types of circuit elements in a computer chip. Okay, ionic solids. Ionic solids are composed of cations and anions, and they are very stable, and they're crystalline, and they're stable at very high temperatures. They have high melting points. Right? You can create liquid sodium chloride, table salt, if you get it hot enough. And there are industries that use it as a heat transfer liquid. They'll melt sodium chloride and run it through their pipes and transfer heat from here to here, like nuclear reactors are good for that. They have these high melting points because they have very strong electrostatic attraction between the positive and negative ions. And they're not like molecular solids, right? They don't have individual molecules, these combination of, right? This is not a sodium chloride molecule. That's simply the simplest ratio of sodium ions to chlorine atoms, 1 to 1. In a little cube, like if you spill salt on the desk and you look at it with a magnifying glass, you see these little cubes. In that cube, you have, for every 1 sodium, you have 1 chlorine, but in that cube, there are billions of them, right? So instead of writing sodium 1 billion and chlorine 1 billion, we just reduce it to the simplest ratio. Ionic solids are a matrix of cations and anions. Now, how do we explain the different melting points? Well, we look at the strength of attraction. And there are 2 factors that determine the attraction between the cations and anions. One is the distance between their nuclei. If they're further separated from one another, then that's a weaker force. So if we have a large sodium and a large chlorine ion, then that weakens the force. The other way is to strengthen the ionic attraction by increasing the charges. So if we say magnesium 2+ ion and oxygen 2- ion, they're both higher charge and smaller distance between. So their force of attraction is very large compared to sodium chloride. So you would expect the melting point for magnesium oxide to be much, much higher than for sodium chloride. Excuse me. All right. So we don't have to spend a lot of time on this one because that video covered the trigonal hole when you get on this 2-dimensional layer. If you get these 3 together with one another, you get a trigonal void. And if you put one on top, then you get the tetrahedral void, because you can draw lines between the nuclei of each one, and you get a tetrahedron shape. That's a tetrahedral void. There it is. They call it a hole. I like void better because it sounds cooler. Now, excuse me, if you have an octahedral hole and you cover it offset like this, you can get not an octahedral hole. If you have a trigonal hole and a hexagonal void, and you cover the hexagonal void, then you get an octahedral hole or a void, octahedral void, because this 3-dimensional drawing that you produce between the nuclei of each of the particles gives you 8 sides. That's where the octahedron comes from. All right. I don't know why I keep the slide on here, because I don't like it. It's comparing apples and oranges. Trigonal is 2-dimensional. Tetrahedral and octahedral are 3-dimensional. So when we talk about their sizes, we're comparing apples and oranges. Now, the octahedral and the tetrahedral are definitely different in sizes, and the octahedral makes a bigger void than the tetrahedral does. All right, and this came out of your book. It just organizes all these structures and forces that we talked about earlier. So we don't have to stop with this one. There we go. Now, what I want to talk about now is relating these intermolecular forces to various physical properties of materials. And the first one I'm going to look at is vapor pressure. So we define vapor pressure by a liquid in a container, which has been made 3-dimensional. In other words, we stoppered it. So now we have this void above the liquid. And in the beginning, there is enough energy. Remember, these liquids have a distribution at the same temperature. They have a distribution of kinetic energies for their molecules. So yeah, most of them would be, it's like a bell-shaped curve. Most of them will be within a very narrow range of that temperature, but you'll have some that are lower energy and some that are higher energy. Okay, the ones that are high enough energy can leave the surface. They can go from the liquid to the vapor phase. And in the beginning, that's all they do. Until you build up enough of them in the vapor phase, now they start losing some of their energy and impacting the surface, and they return. So you get this movement from liquid to vapor and vapor to liquid. At some point, the rate of evaporation equals the rate of condensation. And when you reach that point, you have equilibrium. And then you can measure the pressure that's built up in the headspace. And that's the vapor pressure. And it varies with temperature. If you increase the temperature, you're going to increase the vapor pressure. What this tried to show is the rate of evaporation is constant. The rate of condensation gradually increases as you build up more molecules in the vapor phase. And when they become equal, you have a physical equilibrium. So what effect does the intermolecular force have on the vapor pressure? If you decrease the intermolecular forces that are holding the liquid together, then you should increase the vapor pressure because it takes less energy to get them loose. So increasing there's an opposite relationship here. As you increase the intermolecular forces, you decrease the vapor pressure. So what's the vapor pressure of water at 100 degrees C? 1 atmosphere. That's essentially a definition. What we're illustrating here is if we have this barometer on the left with a vacuum in the top, it's going to be 1 atmosphere is 760 torr. If we have water, some water in the top, it's going to produce a vapor pressure at standard temperature, 25 degrees Celsius, of 24 torr. Right, so it'll push that mercury down. If we put, instead of water, we put ethanol, right? The forces of attraction for ethanol are lower, so it's going to make more vapor pressure. And now we have 695 torr instead. So 65 torr is applied to the surface of that mercury and drive it down in opposition to the atmospheric pressure. If we have diethyl ether, its vapor pressure is huge, right? 545 torr. So it's going to push the mercury way down. Excuse me. Vapor pressure does increase significantly with temperature. So you increase temperature, you're going to increase the vapor pressure. And it varies, it varies with the material. If we're looking at, say that green line, the first one on the left, the diethyl ether, it starts out at a high vapor pressure anyway. But as you increase the temperature, the vapor pressure will go to, when it reaches 760 torr, that's when it boils. Right? It reaches atmospheric pressure. As its vapor pressure, it boils. So diethyl ether boils at 34.6 degrees Celsius. Right? You put it in your hand and it'll boil. Right? What's the body temperature? 98.6 Fahrenheit, 37 Celsius. So you put diethyl ether in your hand and it'll boil. Ethanol, 78.4 degrees, because at its boiling point, because it has a stronger intermolecular attraction. And then water, of course, is 100 degrees. Now, they will still evaporate, right? But diethyl ether evaporates more easily than ethanol than water. So where does it get the energy to evaporate? It extracts it from the liquid it came from, mostly. So when you have water on your skin, you climbed out of the pool on a hot summer day and it cools, right? Because that water is evaporating. And where does it get its heat? Well, from the water, but the water gets its heat from your skin. Okay. You don't have to do all these calculations on the right, but what I want to say is, as we derive from this equation, vapor pressure equals this constant times E. E is the base of natural logarithms, to the minus delta H, which is the heat of vaporization, divided by gas constant R times temperature in Kelvin as the exponent. Then we're going to work that way down until we get an equation that we can use, right? And that at the bottom, we get this equation, the natural log of the vapor pressure equals minus enthalpy of vapor pressure, the enthalpy of vaporization divided by R times 1 over T plus C. That looks like a straight line. So Y is the natural log of vapor pressure, and X is 1 over T. So if we measure the vapor pressure at different temperatures, we can plot this. That's what I'm going to show here. See, you can plot those 1 over T versus natural log of vapor pressure. And if we do that, and we further refine our equation so that we can incorporate two different pressures and two different temperatures, we can easily calculate the enthalpy of vaporization for that particular material. So if the strength of attraction is high, the amount of heat required to vaporize it is going to be high. So the enthalpy is going to be very high for water and very low for diethyl ether. Oh, it does have a name. I wasn't sure if this one had a name. Clausius-Clapeyron, named after two scientists that worked on it. And remember, R has to be in units of joules per k mole, right? It's not the one that we used in the gas chapter, right? 0.08206 liter atmospheres. This one has to have joules in it. So we use 8.3145. Okay. Vapor pressure of water at 25, the heat vaporization. Calculate the vapor pressure of water at 65. Okay, this is going to use the Clausius-Clapeyron equation. And all we have to do is, we can use torr for pressure. That's fine. It works great. But temperature must be Kelvin. So we have to convert the temperature to Kelvin. And we have to associate T2 to the right vapor pressure. Right? If you flip them, if you put them in the wrong order, then you get the wrong answer. And we can calculate the vapor pressure, since we know that the enthalpy of vaporization for water is that given value. Then we can calculate the new vapor pressure as 194 torr. If we go vapor pressure, heat of water 25. Yeah, we change the temperature from 25 to 65, and we get a higher vapor pressure, 194 instead of 23.8. Okay, this is a form of phase diagram against temperature. And what it's trying to show is if we add heat, right, that's our symbol for heat. We're adding heat as we go from left to right, and the temperature is gradually increasing, right? If we start off below zero, right, here's zero. We're using water here, and this is 100 degrees and 0 degrees. I think they said this one's minus 20. So this is pure ice. We're going from here to here. Nothing but ice. That's the solid. Then when we get to this point, when we get to 0 degrees, we're going to have a mixture of ice and liquid water. And when we're at that point, all the heat that we put into it is used to turn the solid into the liquid. So the temperature doesn't change. That's why when we did the freezing point of water in that early lab, you have solid ice and water. As long as you have the solid and the liquid together, the temperature is stable. That's what this is right here. Once you've changed all the solid into liquid, then the energy that's added to it goes into increasing the temperature of the, let's see, this is solid and liquid. And this is only liquid. This would be liquid water. And as you add heat, the temperature increases to 100. When you get to 100, now you've got a mixture of liquid and gas. And it'll stay at that temperature until all the gas, all the liquid is evaporated. Once you get to gas or steam, then you can increase the temperature further. And there are many industries that use superheated steam as their energy transfer medium, right? So, and they have all their pipes marked as steam or liquid water or whatever the case may be, so that you know which one not to touch, which one to be careful around. Okay. Which of these enthalpies would be larger for a given substance, the heat of vaporization or the heat of fusion? The heat of fusion is solid to liquid or liquid to solid. That's what that one means. Heat of fusion. Heat of vaporization is liquid to gas. So which one would be greater, do you think? Which one takes more energy? Which one would be a delta H that's bigger? Vaporization or fusion? Yeah. Takes a whole lot more energy per mole of substance to turn it into a gas. Okay. Okay, so next I want to show you a different phase diagram. And these phase diagrams can become extremely complex. Right? I'm going to show you the very simplest type. And these are various points in the diagram that I want to draw your attention to. Critical points, triple point, and equilibrium lines. Right? So if we look at this one for carbon dioxide, we see that on the x-axis we have temperature. So we're increasing temperature from left to right, and pressure is on the y-axis. So as we go from left to right, the temperature increases. If we were at a constant pressure, say 1 atmosphere, right down there at the bottom, 1 atmosphere, right here. Where are we going to start? We're going to start with the solid, right? The solid is on the left. The equilibrium lines are those blue lines, and they separate solid from liquid, liquid from gas, and solid from gas. So if you're at 1 atmosphere and you hold the pressure constant at 1 atmosphere and you move temperature-wise to the left, when you get to that line, you're at minus 78, actually it's 78.5 degrees Celsius. That's where you have both solid and gas together at the same time. That's where you take dry ice, take a chunk of dry ice and lay it on the desktop and it smokes, right? It's turning from solid to gas straight. That's called sublimation. So that's where you go from phase solid to phase gas. If we increase the pressure, say above 3 atmospheres, and we get into the solid, and then we go from there to the left, to the right, we go from solid to liquid before we get to gas. If we go the other way, say we hold the temperature constant and we increase the pressure, then we can go from, say, from the left-hand side, we start at gas, and we go up into the solid. We cross that equilibrium line, increasing pressure at the same temperature, Then we go from gas to solid. That's how they make dry ice. They just increase the pressure. And they be sure that the temperature is held constant by cooling it, right? As you compress a gas, what happens to it? It gets hot. So they extract the heat from it as to hold the temperature constant, and they get the solid. And then they sell dry ice to whoever wants it. If we start at a higher temperature, we can go from gas to liquid. Say we start right over here, maybe T3, right about here. We can go, well, just to the right of T3. We can go from gas to liquid to solid by increasing the pressure. But if we're at minus 56.6 and we go up, see, where's my arrow? I lost it. Come on. There it is. If we start at this temperature and we go up, we reach a point here, this triple point, where you have solid, liquid, and gas all together at the same time. I know that's a weird concept, but it's true. And it only happens at one point. Okay. Most phase diagrams, the simple type, will give you a positive slope on the solid liquid equilibrium line. So if you start with a liquid at a given temperature and you increase the pressure, you're going to go liquid to solid. Now the next one, I think, is water. Water is different. If you start water in the solid region and you increase the pressure, you go to liquid, because the slope on that equilibrium line is negative. And for the longest time, I used to think that that's why skaters could move so fast on those blades on a solid surface, because all their weight is concentrated into a thin blade, and that added pressure turns that water into liquid underneath the blade, and they just slide along like a lubricant. Well, some people thought different, and they performed experiments and found out, no, it doesn't happen that way. Actually, it's the coefficient of friction between the solid steel and the solid ice, which is extremely low. And that's all it takes to make them go fast. But it was a nice thought I had for a while. Okay, so if we look at these various physical properties that are associated with solids, liquids, and gases, and we say which one, if the intermolecular force increases from one material to the next, what happens to their relative boiling points? Increase, right? If you increase the molecular force, the boiling point is going to increase. How about viscosity? If you increase the attraction, the viscosity should increase also, should become thicker. Surface tension should also increase, right? Enthalpy of fusion, that is, the enthalpy that's responsible for melting, should also increase. Freezing point, yeah, that should increase. Vapor pressure, it's the other way, yeah. That's the only one that goes the opposite direction. And then heat of vaporization is like enthalpy of fusion, increase. Okay, that's done for chapter 10. Next Thursday, we'll cover chapter 11 and then and then we'll talk about the lab. We don't have a lab scheduled, so we'll just talk about requirements.